So we got Daniel. I guess we can start just on right on time. Perfect. There you are, Daniel.
Hello. Sorry, I just struggled. Is the connection okay?
Connection's good. We can hear you. We can see you. Life is good.
Fantastic.
And now we're waiting for Francis. Hello, Francis. Where are you, Francis? Francis came in here a few minutes ago and went to put on his red shirt. So let's. I'm kidding. I don't. There he is. Okay. Oh man, you didn't wear your red shirt. Okay.
I did not.
Yeah.
I looked at the scanner behind me, so I thought, okay, let's put it.
Yeah. Well, you were advertised as you were going to come on with your red shirt, so everybody is waiting for that. But
well, sorry.
No, it's all good. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on work and technology and the wicked problems that are associated with that. I'd like to start by introducing our guests. Daniel Erasmus. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen here. And that should do it. And Daniel Erasmus is the founder of the Digital Thinking Network. He's been at this business of scenario planning, futures, predictions, working with Shell, working with Arie de Geus. How do you pronounce that, Daniel? Geus. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and what Daniel is sort of an expert at is predicting the future using digital tools, which he's developed himself. He's got this proprietary, amazing tool that he's going to talk about that scans sort of every single news outlet, et cetera, but he's created this amazing strategy, heuristic strategy process that he's going to talk about. And then, of course, how do you use that to look and solve and predict wicked problems? Francis is a best-selling author. His latest book is called Squircle. That's a square and a circle. But he's sort of the guy who is the inventor of this idea of the intuitive compass. That is intuitive intelligence that we so often lack in our business world. He's sort of the guru of that. And he's been working with some of the world's biggest companies, from L'Oreal to Apple to Johnson & Johnson, on helping them sort of get the right mindset for leadership for the future, how to deal with this chaos that we're seeing almost every day. There's, the Apple card gets upset. So how do you work in an environment like that and build a more resilient company? With that, I'd like to say, and of course, we have the father of modern marketing, Philip Kotler, with us as well. In the purple shirt,
Well, I made up for the red shirt.
That's right. We have Philip Kotler, who already has a whole bunch of questions, Francis and Daniel, so be careful. He's already, you guys are on, going to be judged here on the, I'm supposed to hit record. Pardon me. Thanks, guys. Okay. Where should we begin? I guess we'll start by asking, let's do this. We'll sort of throw out a topic and then have everybody discuss it. And then we'll go to the next topic. And as we get questions, we also have in our group here, members of our Wicked7 working group. Jenny, Raymond, Karthi, Susie, and more will come and go as we proceed here. So let's start off by talking about the digital divide. The idea that as technology gets more and more sort of ubiquitous and more part of our daily lives, we're creating a society with digital haves and have-nots, and this inequality or digital inequality is growing. Not only is it growing, but it's actually leading to sort of unemployment, and of course the idea that the robots are coming, the algorithms are taking over, and that your job, when they do the analyses, 30 to 40% of white collar jobs are already sort of on the radar of getting chopped. So what happens as we go forward in this kind of world? So let's start with Francis, because I know he's been looking at some of this, the idea that what happened? Daniel, you're back again. Okay, something happened with Daniel. Okay, Francis, go ahead. There you are, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you. So nice to meet everyone again. Daniel, Philip, you were not there when I was there before. Philip, I really appreciate the purple, effort. Thank you for this.
So university is purple, so I guess that's Northwestern University. Go ahead.
Thank you. This okay, that's a tricky problem, because that's a radical change. And as you were saying, the gap is widening. I don't know if the gap is widening personally. I've not researched the numbers, but I remember researching the numbers of how much internet was missing in some areas of the world. That was really big numbers. And that was last year when I did this research. Listen, when we go through major transitions where technology evolves faster than societies, institutions, and even human beings are capable of, at least in the way we function today, there needs to be some transition in between, situations. And we need to accept that it won't be perfect, for one. But the second thing is, there will be people, it's going to be very hard for them to repurpose their skill set and make up for sometimes a lack of skill set into this new economy. What I've learned from participating to a think tank, I was mentioning to you, a transatlantic think tank that observes French politics and economy from the United States. And I was really contributing my very humble piece on leadership, okay? Not economics, not sociology, none of this, because that's not my field of practice. But I think there's one thing that emerges really strongly, and that's a universal minimal revenue. As wealth gets created through technology, a redistribution of that wealth so that we can make sure that these people who most likely won't be able to adjust, to this new environment where technology goes so fast and we cannot upskill, we cannot train, we cannot, change mentalities and et cetera, there will be a gap in time, a gap in revenues for these people. And we're talking about a big population. So I like the idea, at least to contemplate the idea, again, I'm not an economist, but of a universal minimum revenue, because we know that on the other hand, there is exponential wealth created by technology. So I think, to me, more than trying to bridge that gap of skills, let's say, and in workplace, work market integration, which I think won't be possible for some part of the population, I think is really taking care of this population. And taking care of this population is also giving them ways to contribute to collectivity. We were having this conversation together, Christian, earlier, the point of view of everybody matters today. That's the whole idea of collective intelligence. It's not because you don't have a skill that you don't bring value. And those are two different things, So I would say those two things. So three things. So I think there will be a gap that we won't be able to bridge. Two, I think we need to take care of these people financially, economically. And three, we still need to consider these people as valuable contribution to society, regardless of the fact that they don't produce economically.
Daniel, what do you think?
So two things. I mean, I couldn't agree more with Francis. So I think that there are strong arguments. And, I think there's a fascinating book that came out a couple of years ago, which is my mother's favorite author, actually, David Graeber, and a second favorite author. And he wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs, and he talks about that, he's a fascinating anthropologist that wrote about economics. And he took an anthropological lens on economic activity, and which is a fresh pair of eyes, reveals many truths. And in this case, his view was on the way that we constructed economic activity in terms of these jobs, which aren't really doing anything at all. And this feedback came from his readers. who said, I have no idea what I do all day, and it's a complete waste of time. And so it cascaded into this argument, and so that is perhaps better served entire classes of activity by universal basic income, and then free these people to do other things on that. That doesn't address the digital divide because it's very much, sort of an OECD level type of discussion. There's a great set of divides, and I'll touch on that next. But the second thing is, it's often naively viewed that white collar work will disappear, et cetera, et cetera. And the benefit of going second is I could quickly look up something. And so I missed when this book was published. It's an absolutely epic book, and it's 50 years old, and it's by Ruth Schwartz, and it's More Work for Mother. More Work for Mother. Read More Work for Mother. And it's a genius. And what she did is she analyzed technological interventions in a working situation. In this case, it's house mothers taking care of sets of household, all the way from the chimney to white goods, to this, and says, well, how did this pan out? All of these new technologies, did they really deliver on the promise that mothers would be freed, et cetera, from all of these activities, the drudgery, which, today is done by house fathers as well as house mothers, but at that time, certainly it was predominantly house mothers, for X%. And she came to a shocking conclusion. And it's going to be ugly when we talk about technology. And the conclusion was no. What we did is we changed standards. So, if you go back 100 years, people wouldn't wear a fresh shirt every day. And even some of the most well-to-do people, a friend of mine, his great-great-great-great-granddad was, a very senior member of some of Europe's oldest families. And he would take notes in his paper cuffs at the end of the evening's meetings. And so even at that level, they had one shirt for the week, and then paper cuffs and paper collars, which they would change every day. That's how it was. And so we change our standards with the technological interventions. And then it's not just the document, but it's the well-formatted document, because we have word processor in the right font, written in this way with the proper links. And we constantly change our standard. And we did this for white goods. We did this for all of these things. So the promise of technology that it will free us from all kinds of activities or eliminate all kinds of other activities, if you take a longer historical view, has not really panned out. We stay and persist in certain activities, and we simply change our standards in order to do that. And that's a very deep and cumbersome argument, next to the promise and perils of technologies. Yeah.
So Elon Musk has his new robot that just came out, right? The Tesla robot. Do you have one yet, Daniel?
No, I mean, if you look today, just take, what is this wonderful Chinese fast fashion? Fashion used to be once a year, then it was once a season, then those seasons became quarterly seasons, so it's seasons, in our systems we have 5 seasons a year, but once a season, and now we have fast fashion, and fashion lasts weeks there, and you can see how our standards change. Now, the converse side of that is the average, wearing of fashionable attire is 1 point something. It's you wear it, and maybe your brother or your sister will wear it, or a friend will wear it, and that's it. So, we have entire systems built upon this acceleration, but none of that acceleration would have been possible without technology. So we change our standards here, much more so than we free ourselves.
Francis, you know a lot about fashion. You're the fashion guy, so tell us a little bit about that.
No, but what comes to mind immediately, is listening to Daniel, and thank you for all these ideas. I think they were great. We can change standards in different ways. You see, yes, I agree with you. I drive a Tesla, and for a fraction of the price of a expensive German sports car, you know, I go faster, okay, and I don't pollute. So I much prefer this. I mean, you know, of course, there's the battery issue and everything, but, you know, at least in the moment, I feel like, you know, I'm getting more better for less money. So yes, we change our standards. And, you know, I think there's a big idea that we encountered in 2020, you know, we actually don't, you know, we don't have the upper hand as humans. You know, I mean, if there's one governance here on this planet, it's nature. So nature is actually forcing us to redefine our standards. So now let's talk about fashion. And that's huge movement, you know, for repurposing. I have friends in Paris, okay, who only dress, you know, on vintage. And that's super cool. Okay. I personally don't like vintage, you know, because I feel like, oh, no, I'm wearing something that somebody else wore, you know, so that's my generation, you know, but she's younger. And for her, it's cool, you know, and I have friends who come to LA to shop vintage and bring it back to New York, to Paris, you see. So, you know, the standards can evolve, and our standards will have to evolve because the governance of our lives, you know, which has been finally, hopefully acknowledged enough, you know, will force us to collaborate and cooperate with something that doesn't respond to the logic of a technology only, that responds to other logics.
So I'm going back, Phil, you and I, we're going to go back to those paper collars and paper cuffs.
But you see, Christian, this is the problem. It's the problem with projections. You know, we project catastrophes because that sells in media. Okay, and I'm not blaming media. They need to do what they have to do. You know, they have to exist. Yes, they have to exist. You know, I was a book publisher in Paris. You know, you have to promote what you produce. Okay, so it's not a condemnation. It's a mechanism to observe. So you can freely interact with that mechanism called media. And Philip wants to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Let's say that what we seem to be talking about is and questioning is whether there's really progress and the meaning of progress.
Yes.
Because I would have looked at today's modern kitchen as celebrated by most women today if they thought about their mother's life. And her mother couldn't take a job because she had to do a lot of cooking and so on and had to be home. And the modern kitchen with its appliances has freed the woman. I don't know if it's a change of standards or what you want to call it, but here we're trying to build a better world and we need a notion of what that means. It comes up, for example, in discussions of what is poverty. Most of us feel that people are poor when they don't earn enough money, but today being poor isn't the same as being poor 40 years ago when you worked 10 hours a time and you were paid very little, because basically you have your own you have a cell phone, you have a television set. I mean, you may be earning very little, but the poverty is being redefined. And so there's a whole group of people who say, yes, we still have the poor, but it's not the same type of being poor. Okay, so we have to figure out what will make a society full of happier and healthier people. And satisfied people. Now that's a premise, maybe that should not be the goal, but to the extent it is, we always often use the language, how to raise the standard of living. That's the phrase, the standard of living. So the only problem is that we now have a constraint on the standard of living, namely the nature. We don't have the resources. The resources are not infinite. Desires are infinite. Economists and marketers have always said people have unlimited wants and felt that there's unlimited resources. Well, now we lost the unlimited resources. So we may have to constrain, because of the planet's survival, the amount of consumption. In fact, we're going to need a project that tells people, can reconsider what you're consuming, and do you need that much food? And now we can't say that to the hungry people in the world who are underfed, but I'm talking about those who are overfed. And we find that a number of them themselves, at their own choice, are simplifying their life, having less stuff in their life, feeling that you're right. We have to do with less, but less is more. So now we get into that whole dialogue of how you get along happily with less. And let's talk about that. Now, the less may include no job. So that goes back in a circle, that let's assume that we have no more jobs. Every job is done by a robot or automation that can be done better than we do it. There are no jobs. And one of the things I'm trying to figure out, how do we help people have a living wage? What does it mean to have a wage? Who's paying it? What's the source of it?
How we tax the robots, Phil.
And so on.
We tax the robots. Go ahead, Francis. We tax the robots, Phil.
But I think, so now
you delay robots by taxing them. You want to keep us working. Why do we have to have work?
No. It depends. I mean, I think, Philip, the question or everything you're bringing up is extremely valid, and I'm thankful for this. And I think it brings us to a level which is really philosophical and metaphysical, honestly. And I won't drag there, but I think that's the question. I've been in conversation at the OECD about global education for high school, and they've been working on this for 3 years. And what they landed is we're educating to create or emulate flourishing individuals. Okay, so what does flourishing individuals mean? And of course now flourishing means that you take into consideration ecosystem, which Philip was saying at the beginning was unlimited resources. Now we understand that this ecosystem actually exists. We realize that plants and animals may have feelings. They actually create value to our lives. I mean, things that we're taking for granted and abusing and not integrating. And again, when I use those words, it's not condemnation, it's just observation, because I think one of the big things to move forward is to forgive any mistake we might have made in the past, okay? So we can be free of any form of guilt, so we can be fully creative and innovative in reinventing this world order where people will be able to be flourishing together and having a sense of well-being that is not purely depending on consumerism and materialistic needs, because when you think of it, the economy, which of course sustains education, policies, health policies, everything that allows us to live more happily or more safely in the world, that machine depends on one thing, consumption. And consumption is limited as we've known it. So there's a cycle here that needs to be really reconsidered. And the only person that can change that cycle is the human mind, So we're going to have to reconfigure that living sustainably is not a punishment. It's an augmentation. It's an expansion. It's a richer life. It's a deeper life. It's a more creative life.
Daniel.
Look, I mean, the broader arguments around consumption are well versed, and there's a lot of consumption now which is digital, which is immaterial, and it's Fung Wai Fong. She wrote Megatrends Asia, absolutely wonderful person in the future to connect here. And she, argued a long time ago, we're talking 20, 30 years, that we need to redefine what is a good life. And I mean, that kind of connects with what Phil is saying. It's a really old question. And what is a good life? And within that, we have patterns of consumption. So we have our, late industrial or cultural consumption society, which is the fabric of the makeup of our world today. But this is not the only fabric which we can have. I mean, there's multiple ways to think about this. And I'm always struck by the cradle to cradle way of thinking and saying, that there are ways of designing these systems in which the act of consumption has ecological benefit, not an ecological cost. And so if you each time upcycle, not just recycle, but upcycle, so it gets better every cycle it goes through. Suddenly plastics get higher quality plastics and they can do certain things. And you have closed industrial ecologies in which those ecologies, metals, etc., are then recycled, used again, etc., etc. And so there's a real vision there of how to cycle advanced industrial activities, often with quite dangerous chemicals, but really in a systematic way. And I mean, this sounds like science fiction when I talk about it. It's Bill McGonigal and Baumgarten's work there. But, a simple thing as there's a carpet factory in Switzerland, I think is one of the classic cases they found. And the carpet factory, they make carpets, it's out of wool, it has a backing, et cetera, et cetera. And then they work together and they change. And so they have to cut the edges of the carpets. And when they cut that waste is dangerous waste. It needs to be taken care of in a proper way, et cetera, et cetera. And it's an inordinate cost in order to take care of it. Now, think about this. The edges of the carpets, which we put in our houses, is considered hazardous waste, not to mention the carpet itself, And, we
that's
get
part of the waste too.
Of hazardous waste in our houses because, the edges, and you go, there's something wrong here. But when they started redoing it and they changed the plastic backing and they changed the way in which that carpet is colored by different sets of chemicals, there's nothing harmful. They use that same carpet as the carpet that you used when you grow strawberries to keep them hot in the winter. And it's used as organic waste in strawberry farms by simply just changing the type of dyes which are being used. So it's fairly simple, basic interventions can lead to radically different results. And obviously tremendous cost cutting there of having to deal with hazardous waste. Now, I'm not saying all industrial processes will change in that way, nor is it a panacea for deeper problems there. But it does point, as Phil's question there is, are there other ways in which we can define what is a good life and shape our systems so that things get better, not just get worse. And we have real glimmers of this. And just to add to this, sorry, it's a little long, Christian, but unless we point to a future we want, we're left with environmental rhetoric, which basically communicate fear and Armageddon. Pierre Espen Stoknes wrote a stunning book about this on climate change. We need to have a future which we imagine we want. And when we do that, we can change. We want to change because we want to live over there.
So how do we forgive? How do we forgive? So Francis, you're big into forgiving companies. How do we forgive ExxonMobil for what they've done to the planet? What are some steps they can take to earn our forgiveness?
Well, I mean,
this is, I'm of course talking about the energy industry.
Yeah, but you see, so there's so many things that are being said. So imagining a future starts with a new way of living the present. Okay, so I'm working with a company in Chicago, $4 billion company, fast growth, 60 years technology. And one of their mantra for their employees is be here now.
So they've been reading Eckhart Tolle too much. No, I'm kidding.
Yes, exactly. And they hire the human company so we can actually put mindfulness into action. Because, to project oneself into a future is actually not really exactly honoring the intelligence of nature. We call it intelligence du vivant in French, but there's no equivalent, unfortunately, in English. So let's call it the intelligence of life or the intelligence of nature, because this is where creativity is and lives. So, practically, when I work with companies, I say, well, be here now. And I was so happy to meet a client who's actually doing this. Be here now. In the be here now, what ExxonMobil has done in the past is not as important as we make it when we project into a negative future. And the second thing I would like to say is that, ExxonMobil, has created what it's created, and we've all benefited and suffered from it equally. So, if you point the finger to ExxonMobil, and I think I need to point the finger to myself first, because I participated to that system. So now you have two options. Either you step out of the system and you live in an ashram, which I've done, you know that, Christian, or you come back. and then you participate in a way that's not judgmental, because that's going to make you much more creative, for sure. That's the whole argument of Squircle. Susie wants to say something, so.
Yeah,
Daniel,
was the ashram that you lived in, and I've been to one too, but I didn't stay long, the standard of living that we should aspire to?
I don't know, but it's a good point, Phil, because
I mean, the people in an ashram probably are very happy. They don't eat too much.
No, absolutely.
But is it kind of boring, or is it fulfilling?
No, it's not boring. No, honestly, it was not boring. I can actually tell you a few things to this effect. Okay, so it was not boring at all. So that's real life experience. Okay, I got sick during that time with hepatitis A, and they said that's karma. Don't worry. Okay, the white of my eyes were yellow as your t-shirt is purple. Okay, I couldn't lift my leg to step up, to take one stair. So, and they were saying that's okay, let it go. Okay, so I'm just telling you. But no, it was not boring. It was not boring. Listen, I didn't live there for 6 months. I lived there for 5 weeks. And I was active because I was actually learning everything behind the asanas of yoga. I was learning.
You are lucky to get out alive, Francis.
Okay, here we are.
Francis, I have to tell you this story. Michael Ray, who was a professor at Stanford, but separated from his wife and was very depressed. So he ends up in an Indian ashram. So much so that he admires the guru so much. And the guru, after 2 years, says, you better leave. He says, I can't. I love being here. You have better things to do with your life than to stay in the ashram. And he was rejected by the ashram to go back to Stanford so that he could really contribute to a larger purpose than the ashram.
I made the same decision. On my own. You have to come back, but you come back with a different perspective. You come back exactly what you were saying. What is a good life? What is it that I truly need to feel fulfilled as a human being, and to feel I am making my best to serve, the community's wellness and goodness,
I wish we could get billionaires to raise that question.
We should send all the billionaires to an ashram on Mars. That's what we do.
Well, they are actually, they are doing these things. But I think they are also changing in mentalities, they are, there's a whole effort of, giving to your next generation now. And there's been an effort. I forgot what the name of this is. So
the
again,
Giving Pledge, Francis.
Yes,
the
exactly.
Giving Pledge.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, from Steve Jobs and
So another thing. Wait. I wanna jump on this. Since you're saying be here now.
Yes.
I'm gonna go to Daniel and say, Daniel, you're the futures guy. How do you look at the future if you're being here now? And give us an example of the work you've done to help companies interpret what's going on in the chaos that's coming and how they can react in the now to make a difference in the future.
Yeah. Look, I think as an existential statement, as an statement, be here now, etc., liberates us, from certain things in the past. And I think it's a commendable statement. Our work goes in a different direction. And it goes in the direction of looking over the horizon. And we say now, here, is informed by things which have happened, so history, and the better we understand our history, certainly the better informed decisions we can take in the present. And at the same time, we have a future history. There's things about to happen. There's things that we can say about the future. And the better we understand, in the same way as we say, the better we understand the past, we can also understand a lot about the future. And that should inform decisions in the here and now, as you point out, Francis. And so we do two things. So one is we spend an inordinate amount of time with companies looking to answer specific future questions. So recently, Christian, we had the question of sort of what does the Corona world look like? What does that mean to long-term consumption patterns? What does it mean? And what does the post-Corona world look like? And it was really short-term, so it's really a year in. So this was done at the beginning of the Corona. And this is a very large bank. You think of, As well as at the same time, I think we were doing, and I'll touch back on this later, but a couple of 100 billion organizations. So, they're of significant size in the world, certainly bigger than Exxon these days. And so, their question was, once you look ahead at what is coming, and not naively projecting current trends, but really look at that in terms of multiple futures, multiple scenarios. So we organize our thinking around uncertainty, not around certainty. Mm-hmm. So we start with what don't we know, and you work on that. If you organize it around certainty, so the trends and this type of things, you just make a document or work of better myopia. Yes. And it's just, better, but not really. And AI really often is another way of saying myopia, as I've just written today. And so you're looking in terms of uncertainties, you say, what could happen? And you start to notice these small things on the edge, things which are ignored, small, like, oh, hang on, this is going on, or that's going on. And suddenly you start to notice that this curious little thing on the edge have a great deal of relevance today. And so in doing that work, one of the things that we noticed was food security. So you can open 1,000 newspaper front pages during Corona, and none of them talked about food security. None. And, but if you know what you're looking for, and so we run a platform, a software platform that reads billions, with a B, of articles, and then frames that and visualize that as these maps. So think of it like Minority Report. It's not 3D, but it's kind of like that type of thing. We have an interface where you can enter and you can see, a map of really what's going on in the world. And within that map, there was a small little thing which says food security. Food security, what does that got to do with Corona? We're all gonna die, what is this? But when you start to look at this, the chairman of the World Food Organization said, we are at the beginning of a hunger of biblical proportions. And of the 130 to 150 acutely food deprived people in the world, that will increase in an estimate, it's not necessarily the truth, it's an estimate, to 250 million people. So with an extra 100 million people because of Corona. And obviously, this tends to wake you up. And so you can see that the news, it's underreported, but it's something there. Without the AI, we would have never noticed that, without the humans recognizing that. And suddenly you start to make decisions. And then together with this bank, we said, our project is really, how do we use AI to make us better humans? The biggest threat to humanity isn't AI, it's humans. It's been that forever. It's us. And I mean us, I really mean us. That's the biggest
Daniel.
Yeah, exactly. Us, and I'm pointing to myself, absolutely. And so the question here is, how do we use AI to make us more human? And our project is really we start to see out there, and then you can frame that. And this bank said, we live and we work in these communities which are about to become food deprived. How do we change that conversation? How do we change that? So the Nobel Prize was won against, and the normal thing is you sponsor dry goods, you get lots of, calories, and you start to ship that into these circumstances. But that's a very limited response. And so we said, well, is there another way of doing it? The Nobel Prize was won in saying that most, if not all, situations of hunger is market failure. It's not that the crops weren't there, but it's that the crops couldn't connect with the markets, and it was market failure. And in this case, farmers would say, no, I'm not harvesting my tomatoes because that's their capital expense. I'll just leave it here and I'll keep the seeds and I'll harvest that next year because I don't know if there's a market at all because of Corona. And so what could a financial institution do to reduce that? Well, insurance products, and intervening and getting crops out of fields into cities at scale. And so because the senior leadership in this bank understood what was going on, and they understood the consequences by looking towards the future, they could act better in today. And within 3 months, they had produced an app, implemented it, had it in the hands of farmers by the thousands, and they could manage the logistics of getting food off farms into cities. Last year, they facilitated 1 million meals. And this year, it will be 30 million, 36 million meals, and probably the estimate will be a little higher. So this is a lot less than what needs to happen. But it starts to change the dynamic for people in very, very different situations. And in order to do that, none of those parts, it had leadership, where people started to lean into their environment, not ignore it. It required AI to be able to identify these things, and it required conversations by people to start to translate that and build a new language to understand our environments in very different things. And I think we're going to have to do that because we're in the middle of a dry run for climate change. And we're going to have to get very, very good at these 3 skills really quickly.
What was that again? Let me take notes. What were the 3 skills?
3 skills.
I don't know if I can remember. No, the three skills is leadership. So we have to lean into our environments. And I need to phrase that a little bit better, but we're part of our environment. We're not isolated from it. We're part of this world. We're not isolated. We're very much part. Our children's children will breathe the same. With this breath, I breathe a few molecules, which was the last breath of Socrates. We're really part of this. So we're part of this world. What can we do more than just what? And not just in a CSR limited way. There's commercial opportunities. There's all kinds of things that we can do. Second is, how do we use AI to make ourselves much more human? And that's by noticing these things in the future, et cetera, et cetera. So it's being here now, but being informed by the past and the future. And using these absolutely incredible maps to see things at the edge, otherwise not noticed. Otherwise, we're in the world of, fame,
distraction.
Nobody could have thought this would happen. And
well, it's very interesting that by analogy, recognizing communities that don't have enough water and the water was getting scarcer was the parallel to what you described. Namely, there'll be a water shortage and we better start actions. But could I ask the group if they could look at this question now about work itself and the meaning of work? What if we find out that work has not been a pleasant experience for a lot of people, that if you ask the working person, they might say that 70% of my work is just terrible. It's boring. In fact, I've seen some studies where many people report that while they have full-time jobs, it's not a sense of satisfaction coming from it. They just have to do it to earn money. So either we have to find work that is meaningful, not the bullshit jobs, or we have to let people be paid a universal amount of money, a UBI, universal basic income, and those who can't find fulfilling work should be supported anyways. The point is, what is the world of work like? Is it really working? And I would have liked some of your ideas on that.
Let me say something, Phil. So the study you were pointing to is there was a employee engagement survey by Pew Research, where they found, and we mentioned this in our brand activism book, that it's something like 30% engagement. That's like the high end. In some companies it's like 20% of that's the average of
12%
engagement
in the world, 12% globally.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in Asia, where you have horrible bosses, Francis, this is a different story here because, in the West, we have a much more enlightened view of the workplace where we think employees have the right to sort of a pleasant experience. Mm-hmm. That idea doesn't exist in certain parts of the world where, an employee is just be glad you have a job and you're getting paid. Other than that, there's nothing else. So what kind of workplace do you see happening? How does, and see, this is not a technical question. I mean, we've kind of dropped off the technical thing, the digital workplace, but it's still work. So what kind of future of work is possible with the tyranny of leadership or the tyranny of management? And is there another way to organize?
Well, I mean, I think Daniel brought up a very important point. First of all, I mean, his way of looking at the future is actually bring the future back into the present, because as soon as you say the future is uncertain, what are you left with? There's no future. There is a present, and I love it, because then you start noticing, and you're being much more present and much more, I think, smarter, much more connected. But that brings us to the question of the work environment, because AI has a big role to play here, as he said, because AI will process data in ways that we cannot. That's already the case in medicine, and they've been able to have artificial intelligence, which I like to call augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, that were able to identify, or make prognostic on cancer better than great doctors. Okay, but it's not in opposition. It doesn't make doctors less. It makes actually doctors better, because it's not only about the diagnostic. Diagnostic is very important, of course, and we know that the earlier you can diagnose a cancer is probably the best part of the job that you can do. But there's more to it, of course. There's more to it than simply, diagnosing. So I think this notion of AI is important. It's not against us. It's part of us. It's a creation of us. It's actually part of nature, because it's born out of humans who are part of nature. So this notion of artificial intelligence, it's born out of a worldview, that I think is obsolete. It's like, oh, the earth is flat. No, the earth is not flat. And intelligence is not what we think it is.
So on that note,
okay, no. So I'd like just to add one thing. So no, I would like to add one thing. Therefore, as much as it is difficult to project anything today in that level of chaos, because around water, 70% of water goes to agriculture, 70% of agricultural production is wasted. So actually 50% of that water consumption is wasted. Okay, so that gives us a lot to leverage. You see what I mean? So the problems are not what they are, or how our linear mind think they are. Just like Daniel said, it was access to market, the issue. Which is not a small feat. It's a big thing to fix, but it's fixable. It's a production of our culture, it's not nothing else. So I think the future of work is very uncertain. And one of the first thing I would like to say is let's adopt flexibility, because it's at a flexing point of reinvention, and companies are finding it very cumbersome as an exercise. And I think it's actually a very creative opportunity to actually bring people together to discuss what it means, to be at work, how they can be happy at work. And I would like to say one statistic, which I think is important. 85% of senior executives find purpose in what they do. And that percentage reversed itself. Only 15% of the lower ranks find purpose in what they do.
Let me tell you why that is, Francis. It's because the senior executives, like the CEO, are paid 385 times more than what the average employee is being paid. When you have that kind of inequality, you're creating two different worlds that we live in. The world of the average employee, like a third-class citizen, and the world of the CEO, which is they're off to Mars, because that's their hobby instead of having a yacht. But I'm going to go back to this intelligence thing, Daniel. I want to bug you on this, which is eugenics. The Chinese, supposedly there was this experiment with twins using CRISPR where they edited the DNA.
Christian, can I, before we go there, because I'd like to go there, I just want to kind of come back to
go ahead.
Phil's question on work and just, and maybe do something on regenerative agriculture. So, as long as we talk about management, the origin of management comes from manage. It's to tame the horses. So whenever you meet management, you're like, what are they really? They're tamers. So, that's very different from organize. Together, you're not going to get much done on your own. You're just not, You know, we need to get the whole village together, and the kids and the this and the that and the other village and all of those people. And then we start to organize. And there's a whole sets of human activities, get to the moon, feed ourselves, you know, today.
Build Stonehenge.
By the hundreds of millions of people, we are living longer, better, healthier lives than ever before in human history. The Millennium Development Goals had to be rephrased because we met them earlier than we ever thought we would. You know, and a lot of that largely because of China's ascendance, to be honest. But so organizing ourselves has enormous benefit. But that's different from management. And so I think there's a deep distinction that one can make there in terms of deriving meaning from work, et cetera, because, you know, people are legitimately responding to that if they're being tamed. You know, and there's a number, you can go Foucault in that if you really want to. And I want to touch something else on the water thing, which Francis mentioned, if you don't mind. I go back to this theme of systemic change. We have certain systems that for, you know, aggregation, historical reasons, et cetera, or bad choices, or uninformed new classes of technologies have just accrued and they persisted in their way. And there are a great many opportunities for systemic change. So we just did a project for Europe's largest technology firm. And so they wanted to see, they make a machine. It's the most complicated machine on earth. And so they said, can we do something else in the world? You know, is there a problem? And what are the ways in which these problems can be solved? So we looked, you know, urbanization, food security, connected world, energy, climate change. We looked through all of these themes and identified 153 game-changing technologies or game-changing systems where we can achieve radically different outcomes. And I'll give an example. And I mean, the point here is the world is a very different world if we choose it. Mm-hmm. Regenerative agriculture. As Francis points out, the bulk of water is used by agriculture, and God bless it, you know, I want to eat my nice vegetables as well, like the next person, and, you know, we do need to eat. But there's an emerging body of work, which is the moment you go past the field and you see the field is empty, it's plowed and it's lying fallow. You know, it's not fixing carbon, it's not fixing power from the sun in carbon into the soil. And when you have plants growing there, the plants are taking the energy from the sun and they're fixing it into the soil. And so that carbon gets in the soil. The bacteria in the rhizosome, you know, so that's all the bacteria and fungus that lives in this soil bed, you know, as I think 3 to 5 times the CO2, which is fixed in there, than in plants. If we want to reverse the outcome of climate change, we need the rhizosphere to work well. Bacteria grows really fast. Plants, a little slower. Grass is okay, but trees are really no slower. So the real game is how do we get this rhizosphere healthy and working? And it turns out cattle. You know, if you have cows walking on this and they defecate, that's full of bacteria, that fixes the water that rains. 65% of inland rains comes from the evaporation from that field, and then it rains back again. So you have radically different outcomes if you start to get those ecologies. And regenerative agriculture, in this case, as is practiced in grass-fed beef, et cetera, is carbon neutral, or in some cases, if it's done properly, carbon negative. And it starts to fix vast amounts of carbon into that. Now, I'm not saying this is the panacea or things like this, but I'm saying that there are radical system changes that become possible once one starts to, and you can see it from the birds. The birds start to vote with their wings and they return to these ecosystems, which are now functioning properly versus monoculture, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of 153 of these different approaches. You know,
that's your next book. That's your next book, Daniel. 153 things to do to fix the planet. First, hey, wait a second. I have a timeout. I want to ask if anybody has any questions in the group here. Susie, I think you had one. Raymond has one. Just let's do a break like that. Yeah, we got some questions. Go ahead. Susie, go ahead.
You can go first.
Okay. No, I just wanted to ask, what you said before, Francis, is like being in the moment or the now, even for companies to kind of forget what has happened before. But isn't that often kind of a little bit of the problem of how the design of products are, that they don't look into the future, or that they're not produced, like plastic, for example, that they don't really take the whole product cycle into consideration, that you don't really produce things with sustainable thinking in mind. And that kind of brings us into the predicament we are now, because many of the products or how business has been conducted hasn't taken the future into consideration.
Sure. So Susie, no, I just want to clarify, is the way you engage in the future. So what Daniel was saying is absolutely, it's great, it's fabulous, like the way you go about the future from a scenario planning standpoint with the acceptance of uncertainty makes you really smarter, because now you're facing uncertainty. So what are you left with? You're left with how do you engage with it? How would you feel about it? What those data make you imagine? So, but that imagination only lives here. So it's not opposing future and present. Okay, it's an attitude towards time, which of course doesn't preclude experience from the past. It doesn't preclude analyzing the possible scenarios of the future. It's a mindset. It's how you work, in the moment, which is, I'm gonna tell you, we are constantly projecting a judgmental way of thinking, which precludes our creativity. So that's actually a better way to say it, maybe, and so that we can actually certainly judge, but not start with that in the way we engage the complexity of the challenges that we're facing today. Yeah. So I
to the ashram with you. Off to the ashram.
Okay. And I wanted to say one thing also, just about those projections, catastrophic projections about the future and everything. So I was at a conference. I was talking there, but I was not me saying this. I was somebody working with the French Minister of Economy, and they were saying that using AI and satellite, you were able to do micro watering in fields. Look at your garden. How do you water? You splash water, so we would need much less water, and the water consumption for agriculture would be reduced by 1/1,000,000th. I couldn't believe that number, and that's born out of technology. I mean, how you deploy this, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, it's a whole other question, but, just to show the possibilities. So what we're doing, and Susie, to answer your question, we're projecting into the future, out of fear, rather than what Daniel does, scenario planning, so you can look at the edge and then, discover things that you would not be able to discover if you're not able to drop the lens of, the linear thinking. This is not going to take us where we need to go, and AI is feeding us with a level of information and creative thinking that's unprecedented.
So do you think AI is going to replace the CEO and get paid the same salary, 300 times more than the average worker for an AI, think machine?
Who are you asking this question?
Just kidding, bad joke. Raymond, you have a question. Raymond, you have a question, man. Unmute. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Couldn't find the button. So I was just kind of trying to synthesize some of the core ideas that have been, played with so far. And I was thinking about, okay, we've talked about how we are all sort of, participating in this interconnected system. And we have just all this like sort of latent creative potential in and just sort of, human power, and that sort of an awareness of integral patterns and leadership skills are a lot of like the sort of like the principal aspects of like dealing with the future or dealing with what's coming. And we have all this information. So it doesn't seem to me that there's a problem with how much information that we have, but a dissemination or like a pooling effect where it's being sort of like clotted towards a certain percentage of the population and doesn't get to, the people or like the mainstream. And people
Raymond, it's even worse. It's manipulation of what the news is, right?
So right. So I was going to, so that's definitely part of it. I was going to get to that. So like, people on average, my day-to-day life, we seem to be, okay, well, there's contrasting long-term awareness with operating sort of on a short-term, more consumptive mindset. And we see that, like, things like going to spiritual retreats, mindfulness, they can be helpful, but they can also be sort of like these empty vessels to be filled with, like, you can use mindfulness to be more sort of like productive for your company, right? Or like to have new insights for, like, ways to manipulate people with social media. So, and lastly, like, artificial intelligence is a very powerful tool, but it's not necessarily fully immaterial. It has a physical space. You have servers somewhere which contain all your data for the internet, and it's algorithmic and it's owned. So I guess my question is, given all of that, how do we put sort of power or awareness towards habit change at, like, the common person's level, so that we can, leverage that latent collective creative energy and open up awareness for everyone, as opposed to kind of having it continue this top-down hierarchy? Does that make sense?
I can talk to you about my practice, okay, Raymond, because the question that you're asking is humongous. So, I experiment within organizations of tens of thousands of people. It's not the world, okay? It's not a country. It's a small amount of people. It's a big amount of people. And within that big amount of people, I always say, start smart and small. You start with a small experiment. You make sure that you're clear of the level of risk you're willing to take on as you experiment. But as a scientist, you isolate factors. You're open to not know. You're open to learn in the process. And you're open to finding solutions in a way that will surprise your usual way of thinking. So that's what I do in my small world, to contribute to a new way of working, a new way of representing oneself, a path forward, because everybody needs a path forward, okay? And coming up with deeper, better solutions that do not only profit the top of the organization, but live in a stakeholder capitalism that's integrating many more dimensions than simply the old model, which we know has reached its end. So that's my answer in my world, as a practitioner, helping organizations.
Daniel, you have a name for this. Don't you call this strategic strategy heuristics or something? There's a buzzword you have for this. So listen to this buzzword. Explain it, Daniel.
So, Raymond, it's a fascinating question you're asking, so there's two layers to this, well, three really. So the first layer is technologies tend to democratize over a period of time. They do. So you get a technology and then more and more and more people get it, et cetera, et cetera. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it will continue for all type of technologies. We run a set of servers and, it's a lot of servers and it uses a good chunk of energy, and we buy green energy and all of that. But, you're talking capabilities way outside the thing. And even, this best computer on earth, the Summit computer is worth 14 minutes of the Fortnite network. The reality is the Fortnite network isn't being used in that capability or anything like that. So our hopes that technologies democratize, we haven't yet seen in AI. And I just see from the sweat of doing this, that's not going to happen soon at all. That's kind of one. The second thing is this.
Hey, what happened to Watson? Bad joke.
Yeah, and I mean, the Watson is interested in replacing people, so we'll make the thing not humanizing work practice and augmenting, as Francis said, or as I'm arguing in my book now, is really changing how we work together and have these insights. So we like to say we don't have bad, too much information. We have bad interfaces. And with slightly different interfaces, these edge awarenesses become easy and there. So when we implement it in an organization, we want as many people in the organization to be able to engage with these interfaces and to be able to see that, not just the 4 people in the strategy group, but it should be broadly disseminated therefore. And you increase the likelihood of serendipitous discovery. And you change that kind of collective thinking where not just one person or four, and they have to advocate it and say, oh, well, we've seen this big new thing and there's a big world there, come to see my world. But everybody can see that. And you can start entire meaningful discussions on that, because suddenly this becomes an awareness which is in the gene. And we're all sitting looking at these screens, you know. I've got a chapter in my book that I call, you know, it was a big discussion. What's the shape of the universe? You know, is it, you know, Klein or this or there, you know? And no, the universe is square, like the phone, you know, and that's the universe we have. It's square. I mean, it's a rectangle. It's not even square. That's a rectangle. So, you know, we're living in these worlds, and this way of working will persist because it's awesome. You don't even have to leave bed and you're doing these things. So there's this mix of horror and awesome that we have. And so what is the likelihood of us making serendipitous discoveries sitting, you know, I used to write and say, the best knowledge management system is a cup of coffee. You know, that's a lesson learned from the French Revolution, actually. You know, cups of coffee changed discursive practices, and suddenly different people were talking with each other, which never would have happened. And suddenly you have this. So where in our world are we getting overview and these discoveries to be able to look ahead and find meaning in our activities that otherwise will? That's the challenge of our age, and that's really what we're working on. Versus, you know, 4 people get to have that insight, or the masses of the universe get to have that insight. The more people that have these insights, the easier it is to change, the easier it is to transform. And not all organizations have that span between what the CEO earns and that. That's very much a US phenomenon. It's not the same in Japan. It's certainly not the same in Northern Europe or large parts of Europe. You know, if you go to Norway, you know, it's 20 times the difference between the wealthiest.
Which is the limit that Drucker recommended, by the way, right, Phil? That was the Drucker limit. Karthi, you had a question.
Yes, I did. Actually, my question is more for Daniel, because he was talking about the technology and also just about the serendipitous discovery and creating, you know, a place where other people can, you know, contribute. So I was just wondering, Daniel, with things like the metaverse and everything coming up, will those kind of things help, you know, drive more of what, you know, even what Raymond was talking about, where more people can get involved, more people can become aware, and more people can discover?
Karthi, explain what you mean by metaverse. Is it Facebook's metaverse, or is there another metaverse, or what's the metaverse?
Not Facebook's version of metaverse, not VR, but the actual metaverse as it exists, where different people can decide what they want their experience to look like and design that experience for themselves.
Yeah. It's a fascinating question, you know, for multiple levels, because, you know, there's a long history in technology. It's like, oh, no, don't worry. We have a new thing here and it will solve all the problems, you know. And there's a habit, you know, I'm a CEO of an AI company. So I also, you know, we do advisory, but we also do this. So I can say, don't worry, our kit is going to solve everything, you know. and that's not true, because there's a habit, and we're not, you know, Silicon Valley enterprise, but we certainly have a Silicon Valley board. And so to take a whole postal system, you know, all the way from packages to packing, and pick the postage stamp of it and optimize for that and pretend you've done the postage, you know, move things and break fast. And that's not the reality. So I think there needs to be a humbleness comes to what technology can change and what technology can deliver. And you need to come to the space with a depth of humanity, which is different from the current practices, I might add, you know. And you know, there's a lot of value to say, you know, few people in Silicon Valley think they can change the world, and occasionally they do. And I want to add, not always for the better. You know, there's a little caveat there. So we need to come to this with a set of humility. Our job from the AI is to show people things in context. And when they see the world in context, they're able to understand the river we're in. You know, John Seeley Brown talks about the whitewater world. And in that whitewater world, you're relying on different senses. So we don't call it visualization. We call it visceralization. because you're interacting with these data spaces and you feel it in your body once you're interacting. You know, the picture, and good luck, there's your dashboard on the world. No, you're interacting, you're playing with it, like better magic circles. And when you have these better magic circles, you start to arrive different levels of medium, not as individuals, but as groups of people trying to understand what's going on. And our belief is from doing that, you start to build certain heuristics. You know, you have a vision of the future, where things are going. You have this way of interacting, you know, and Francis, is a brilliant move that he says, go back to the present, you know, because that's what psychologists does. Is sit down, you know, this is your first day of the rest of your life, you know, and it's an absolute brilliant move because it forces people into different sets of decision making. Now, you know, so I think that's really the nuance that he's adding there to transforming organizations. So what one does in that is you can start to build tentative heuristics for that. So I call that strategy heuristics. So this isn't scenario planning in the sense of, oh, we have a grand plan and we'll pick, if this happens in the world, and the early warning system, we'll pick file 42B and we go and do this. No, this is early learning systems. How do we learn better? How do we start this conversation? How do we craft better magic circles? And how do we make meaning together with each other by seeing, you know, the world with better interfaces, not through the narrow 15 things that, you know, certain Silicon Valley companies tend to give us, et cetera, et cetera. And when you optimize systems for meaning, you know, not for revenue, engagement, and building friendships, which they are, but for meaning, you end up in a very, very different design space. You know, and I think that's the shape of things to come. You know, if we have anything to do with it, yeah.
Daniel, we're going to design things and optimize things, not just for meaning, but also for justice.
Yeah.
Mm.
But I have we have one last sort of topic to cover, and then I'm going to ask Phil to make some closing statements on what he thinks. But the Taliban have banned or have been banned by Facebook, but not by Twitter. That was at least last I heard. And the question being, Silicon Valley making a difference in the world, sometimes not in the most positive way. I guess I'm talking now about fake news, manufactured news, the idea that we can distract people. Raymond's got to go. See you later, Raymond. Thanks. But what happens when we have a world that's created by this sort of fake digital sort of backwash and garbage that's being promoted, paid for by, you know, paid interests to basically create vaccine hesitation, climate denial. I mean, this formula is being used to polarize the world and basically destroy any kind of consensus or community building that we could have as a sort of the community of nations. I said it. But how can we get around this problem of fake news and propaganda? And every election now, from now on, until we solve this problem, is going to be a joke because of it. Francis, you go first.
Thank you.
Okay, Daniel, you go first. No,
that's okay. Whatever. Okay, yeah, whatever.
Go ahead. What did you say, Daniel?
I just should I go, Francis? Go. I just relax. I'll listen to Francis and think.
No, we'll put you on the spot first, Daniel. You go first. Okay, you do your Googling, Francis. Daniel, you go first.
I'm going to tell you, Christian. I mean, I have my answer. Sorry, Daniel. Okay. And it's not on Google. It's very personal. You know, I mean, can we agree that we're going through a paradigm shift as a civilization? Okay. So if we go through a paradigm shift, obviously the institution.
Or a paradigm collapse. I don't know if it's a shift. It's
well, yeah. But you know, collapse is judgmental. You see what I mean? I'm not sure it's positioning as the best way to navigate it, but it's okay.
Okay.
So no. I mean, those are important things because language shapes thoughts. You know, so we have to be careful with this. So let's go back. So paradigm shift, meaning we're moving from a certain way of civilization to a new way of civilization. The old way of civilization was sustained by institutions. Okay, that was their function. We had institutions to keep the order in place. Obviously, we're going through chaos because those institutions cannot sustain the order of before and are being questioned as such, okay? So that's exactly where we are with COVID. We were living in real time, what we've denied for a long time, okay? And that is this paradigm shift. We're in it. So now you're in it. You're in it. It's catastrophic in the sense that what used to protect us is no longer protecting us. Example, science. The consensus around the fact that science would provide a solution that serves the majority of us, a vast majority of us, is being questioned today. So where do you move from there when that's at the heart of our education system and our way of thinking of the world? At the same time, as this is collapsing, to use your word, okay, this consensus.
Let's burn the books. Yeah.
Okay. So as this consensus is disappearing, something else is emerging. You have people who have access to the public word who would never speak before. They have access to information, as Daniel was saying. Information tends to democratize, access to information. So, but this is invisible. Why? Because it's not institutionalized yet. It's not recognized. It's not recognized because we look at the world from the old paradigm. But I bet you that we could prove that as much as there is something disappearing, there is as much appearing of the new order. That is just, that has meaning, that brings purpose, that would define a good life. And, that's because, and you know why? Because everything is dynamic. That's what that's what the humbleness comes in, the humbleness that Daniel was talking about. Everything is dynamic, nothing is static. So what I know today will be outdated tomorrow, especially in today's world. So when you come to an organization and you advise people, you need to remember this. You're there to catalyze something and you don't really know what will come out of it necessarily. And that's better probably, that we don't. So that's my 10 cents or my 2 cents on a very, 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 very sticky question that is on everybody's mind today. And that we need to live through, because this is the only way. You have to go through that chaos and that deconstruction for something else to be born. And we don't know what's going to be coming. But, if we all contribute from a place of centeredness as opposed to from a place of projection and fear and everything, chances are there will be more interesting serendipitous discoveries, to go back to what Daniel was saying. And I love what he was saying about, what were you calling the strategy?
Heuristics.
Yeah, heuristics, exactly. Yeah, which I strongly believe in heuristic in the process of making decisions. Yeah, and the word of answer. Okay, I'm done. Yeah.
Thanks, Francis. Daniel, you've got this thing where you're looking at 1 billion news articles a day, and not just news articles, but also. So, how do you know what's fake and what's real? And if you can tell the difference, why can't we, have a sorter that says this stuff is real? 99% of this other stuff here is, verboten, or just put a little warning signal on it.
Yeah, it's 1 billion fetches, so it's less because there's little parts, so it ends up less, a couple of million, but it's still, we do 1 billion fetches a day. So, and I'm looking at Jenny. You've been really quiet, so I'm kind of wondering what Jenny thinks. I haven't heard anything from Jenny, so I'm sorry. I'm just warning you. I'm stepping out of my role, but I'm putting you on the spot. I want to hear also what Jenny thinks. So I'll keep it super short. Three things. The idea that we can algorithmically determine the truth is Mickey Mouse. The best case here is in Wikipedia, there's a little block and that's it, and then you get a thing that analyzes that block and then
hang
that
on
puts
a
it in.
sec. Francis has to leave. So
no, I can stay till the end. I stay till the end, but I tell the end out of courtesy to everybody and deep interest for everything that's being shared and said. So I'm here, but I just want to know that
we're a little bit over, we go a little extra. What can I say?
Okay. Sorry, Daniel. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Daniel. Back to you. Yeah.
There isn't an algorithm for the truth. Truth is something that's constantly negotiated. It's constantly mediated. Actually, my favorite French philosopher spent a lot of time working on that. And so truth should always be considered with a little t. And for one place in the world to think that they're going to calculate that and do that is not serious, not from a knowledge perspective, not from a philosophical perspective, not from anywhere. B is that truth is something that we constantly mediate and discuss with each other. So what we do is we make maps. And if you type in vaccine, you can see, oh, there's a little bit. And yeah, vaccines are a little bit dangerous, next to everything else that vaccines does, which is amazing. And so you see things always in context. You know, why is it easy to drive a bicycle? You can get back on the bicycle and there's cars moving and this and there, because it shapes center of attention. Our brains do that very well, and periphery, stuff happening. And that informs our decision-making. Our interfaces on the screen don't do this. And by design, angry people click. And the quicker you can make somebody angry, they're going to click. And that's such an idiot in Twitter, and that's such an idiot, and And so we engage and we just escalate our level of anger. There's a fascinating paper published that people need to put their phones away so that they can stop being depressed, so that dopamine can go to a normal cycle, because we figured out algorithmically to give us dopamine. Can you imagine that? You know, put this thing away so that your dopamine can go to a normal level, because you're super stressed and super excited all the time. And our body isn't physically made, our brains aren't made to do that. This is unhealthy. It is, there's nothing, you know, Facebook is strongly correlated with suicide in the US, strongly correlated, you know, so we have real problems here with these interface designs. And we're not going to algorithmically get the way out of it. We have to address this at the level of dopamine, you know. So this is at the level of how we build these interfaces. Interfaces that calm rather than excite. Interfaces that shows us new vistas rather than anger us. Interfaces that brings people together in sensible discussion rather than screaming matches. And those things are possible. They have been done. It's not just some illusionary horizon out there. And then we look at the reality of the day. And the reality is, and sorry, it's very short because I really want to hear what Jenny thinks. So I'm warning you again. So
she'll call you after the show. Yeah.
No, you know, we've given, and I didn't have time to Google it because Francis was really quick, but we've given something like 4 billion doses of COVID vaccine. I mean, this is a year and a bit after the thing. We figured out how to make something nobody ever imagined. 3 days after the gene was published, you know, BioNTech already had a candidate vaccine. We've got COVAX that you and I have discussed, Christian, should have collapsed, you know, because of the Indian, you know, the Delta variant when it hit India. And it managed to, you know, recover itself and get the vaccines out in the world. This is an astounding success for the international order. It's unimagined. You know, I've done 3 sets of pandemic scenarios for 20 years. We've looked at global pandemics. For more than 10 years, we've tracked Marlborough virus, you know, hemorrhagic fever, all of these things, waiting to see if a global pandemic will emerge. You know, tracking this. We spent, you know, 6 months ahead of this thinking, and we never imagined that the global scientific system and the global system itself could respond in such a powerful way to address this. So we are actually winning. It doesn't feel like that. And lots of people don't think like that. But the reality is, you know, 4 billion doses have been put in people's arms, and they have radically different outcomes because of that. From our parents to our partners to our children, you know, this is amazing that this has been achieved. So my question is a different question: is why do we feel like we're losing when the most incredible thing that I never would have imagined, having spent years working at this?
Because the planet's dying, Daniel, because the planet's dying.
The planet's not dying. The humanity cannot live on this planet. That's a very different story.
Yeah, that's too pat, Christian. It's too this. It's not really, because we'll do that. The same things we'll do for climate change. You know, I'm sure of it. You know, and why do we feel we're losing? Because that talks to our organization, how we go about imagining how we organize ourselves, which is Phil's question. It's like, how do we give meaning in our work? And it talks to that. And somehow all of these people doing all these incredible things, as a society, we keep having the rhetoric we're losing.
we're gonna bring you guys back for the solutions phase of this thing, because right now we're discussing the problems phase, the wicked problems, but we're gonna have a virtuous solutions phase, which is gonna be a lot more optimistic, Francis. But that's a couple of months down the road, okay? Phil, you have any closing comments on the pyramid of love and the pyramid of hate? Because, you know, we have actually, yeah.
Jenny.
You're raising a whole new question, love and hate and so on.
Well, he was talking about how we escalate, you know, escalating people.
Jenny,
yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
See, my husband and I are in the same room, so I've been instructed not to say anything. Otherwise, the levels go.
Oh,
you can talk now because I'm muted.
No, we're probably going to have to do a closing because it's already 25 minutes over time. So, but thanks everybody. I really appreciate everybody's input and everybody's participation. This was
Francis,
fantastic.
Thanks.
And
Daniel,
we will definitely do a follow-up in the next few months.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Phil, you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I think that we had some very interesting ideas. I like the talk that we've all lived with institutions we trusted, our churches, our media, New York Times, and now studies are showing that all of these have lost we've lost confidence in sources that we can trust. So I think we have to figure out how to build a world of more trusting institutions. You know, so what would a medium be like that we can trust? What about a religion that we can trust? I remember a fellow who said he changed his religion every year. He went through Buddhism, he went through Christianity, he ended up as a Catholic. Not that he was satisfied, but all right, that's good. He was searching. But we need to build more trusting sources. And, you know, there's a guy who goes around and he does a good job measuring how much trust exists in different organizations. That's the fellow who works for PR. He's a public relations guy.
Chicago, yes.
Yeah, but in any case, I think when we talked about work and technology, we talked more about technology than really work. We didn't get into the tissue, the flesh of a working life. And what will a working life be like? Will it be more satisfying in the future? And will there be work for people in the future? So maybe we can talk about that again, because I didn't think we did enough with that.
You're right, Phil, as usual. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Loved it.
Have a good day.
Ciao.
Thank
Love
you.
you guys.
Meeting all of you. Nice.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone.